Yes, McCain did seem to be working to help Russia gain control of Montenegro. But what Putin didn't realize yet was that McCain's loyalties were not to Putin, they were not to Russia in general. They were loyalties to a particular Russian oligarch, a man named Oleg Deripaska. Oleg Deripaska was known by the nickname Putin's oligarch. He was the 9th richest billionaire in the world at the time, super rich man. He owned the world's largest yacht, which was called the Queen K. It was so huge it had a crew of more than 70 people. Oleg was the controlling shareholder of a company called Rusal. This is the Russian aluminum giant, which happens to be the biggest aluminum company in the entire world. It just so happened that 40% of Montenegro's GDP and 80% of its annual export earnings came from the sale of aluminum. So Oleg went into Montenegro and bought up all of the aluminum plants, meaning that overnight, Putin's pal, Oleg Deripaska, had taken control of the national economy of Montenegro. Now, in the shadows, John McCain was working with Oleg Deripaska. I dug up some photos here to show you from 2006. These photos were taken in Montenegro. This particular yacht was owned by an Italian felon, a man named Raffaello Folieri. He was a rich and powerful player, also a convicted con man. You may notice standing behind him was his girlfriend, someone you might recognize, actress Anne Hathaway. The man whose hand he's shaking is Rick Davis. Davis was John McCain's presidential campaign manager, but Davis was also a lobbying firm president. It was called Davis Manafort. Powerful, powerful lobbying firm. It was this lobbying firm that ran the entire campaign for independence for Montenegro to break away from Serbia in 2006. All right? So John McCain's campaign manager was a big-time lobbyist who was getting funding from Russian businessmen to help Montenegro break away so that Montenegro could be taken over. Now, you'll notice in this picture, walking behind Rick Davis, is Senator McCain. McCain and Davis went out on the yacht with Folieri and Anne Hathaway, and that was kind of the cover story. The cover story was that it was just a special occasion to celebrate John McCain's 70th birthday. But that's not true. You see, anchored not that far away was the mega yacht of Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska. Remember the Queen K yacht. What happened was that McCain boarded one yacht, and they snuck over to link up with Deripaska on the Queen K. You see, McCain wasn't actually working to help Vladimir Putin or Russia. He was trying to use Deripaska's wealth and close connections to the Russian government to gain control over Montenegro to turn over to Russia's enemies, to these New World Order globalists, including George Soros and Rothschild. And that is how things eventually played out. If you do some searching, you guys will find out that Vladimir Putin absolutely hates John McCain. That's because McCain is a tool of the globalists who are trying to destroy Russia. So you got Rick Davis and Paul Manafort, these lobbying partners who are running the campaign for John McCain, largely on behalf of these corporate interests from the Russian oligarchs. You can look all this stuff up. Now, is there a connection between Donald Trump and Russia? Well, yes, there is. Just not in the way that the mainstream media wants to cast the whole thing. The way they're pushing it is he's in league with the state of Russia, that he's a cohort of Vladimir Putin. That's not true. Do you know who became Donald Trump's campaign chairman? Paul Manafort, the guy who is the lobbying partner, the business partner of
Rick Davis, the campaign manager of John McCain in 2008. Manafort, Davis. These guys pushed big time for legislation that was pro-Russian on behalf of these oligarchs. Not only for the oligarchs in Russia, but also for Ukrainian oligarchs. These Russians making money through Ukraine. So, is there a connection to Russia? Yes. But it's not with the state of Russia. Donald Trump's campaign chairman was big league, to coin a Trump phrase, into the Russian interests. Did Trump go and say, hey, I want this guy because he's connected to Russia? No. Donald Trump is as much a puppet. As much as I know I'm going to make everybody mad who's a Trump supporter, Donald Trump is a puppet as well. Maybe not to the extent that they want him to be. Maybe he's playing them to the fullest extent that he can. But he didn't choose Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort was forced upon Donald Trump to run his campaign, to try and schmooze him and get him into seeing things in the same kind of paradigm as John McCain. So Trump hasn't done that the way that they want. Trump has actually sided, to the extent that he's allowed to publicly, which is very little. He actually has sided with Vladimir Putin, who is an enemy of these Russian oligarchs. Putin has put some of these oligarchs in prison for their corruption and for the stuff that they have done to undermine their own country, Mother Russia. If you'll remember, what I said was, when you see the FBI go after Paul Manafort, that's when it's dangerous. That's when it is big time. So here we are on Drudge Report, and look at what we've got. FBI has raided Paul Manafort, gone after his bank records. That's it. This is what the grand jury is about. They haven't released anything. I'm telling you guys in advance. I'm telling you right now, before anyone else in the media talks about this, the grand jury that's being called to go after Trump, to look at evidence, this is what it is. They're building their case around Paul Manafort and Manafort's dealings with Russia, because Manafort's a dirty scumbag. I mean, big time in bed with the Russians. But they've been silent about that. And what I was wondering about was whether or not they'd be willing to go after Manafort, because Manafort he's a major player with the deep state. He's a major player on behalf of the military-industrial complex. He's got close ties to these globalists. So if they go after him, they're going to end up having to take down some other people, unless they really are just so dishonest it's unspeakable that they ignore the evidence of what they find about other people besides Trump. But if you're a Trump supporter and you want to know what's going on, learn all you can about Paul Manafort. I'm beside myself. This is horrifying, the way that the deep state is going after Trump right now. Oh my goodness. Trump, to be honest, Trump really doesn't have the Russian connections. Manafort's got the connections. But they are going to throw Manafort under the bus here in order to get Trump. Trump is such a big fish to them. They are willing to sacrifice one of their major agents, Manafort, in order to get to Trump. So we'll see how Manafort, what they're going to do is they're going to try and flip Manafort, get Manafort to turn around and give them anything they can on Trump. Try and they'll offer him, in the end, they'll end up offering him reduced sentence or some kind of sweet deal if they help, if he helps take down Trump. And from what I know of Manafort, it's not going to take him more than a split second to decide to do that, because the guy's a turncoat. But anyway, Paul Manafort, keep your eyes on this story. This is huge.
I will say that the indictment of Paul Manafort is extremely significant. And for my viewers who have been around since 2016, you'll recall that months before anyone in the mainstream media had even mentioned the name of Paul Manafort in connection with this Russiagate stuff, I was very direct in my predictions that not only would they eventually go after Manafort, but that Manafort himself would become the central figure in the Russiagate probe. I also predicted that Manafort would end up indicted. And all of this has come to pass. I've also made predictions that are yet to come to pass, but I believe time is going to validate those predictions as well. You see, the entire Russiagate probe is nothing less than a soft coup attempt that has been manufactured by the deep state and those who control it. This is a well-coordinated plot by the Rothschild New World Order network of Marxist globalists, corporate oligarchs. They are trying to overthrow the vote, the freedom of the American people to choose for ourselves. Like him or hate him, Donald Trump won the electoral vote. He is the legitimately elected president of the United States. We, the people, put him in office. The Constitution prescribes 3 possible ways to remove someone from office once they are in the presidency. Number 1, we can vote Trump out in 2020. Number 2, the U.S. House can impeach him and the U.S. Senate can remove him from office. Or number 3, he could be removed by the collaboration of his administration officials in conjunction with the U.S. Congress. Using the authority of the 25th Amendment, they could declare him essentially to be incapable of fulfilling his duties. What the deep state is doing, though, is they are working around and outside of the U.S. Constitution to take the power to install or remove a president from office away from us and away from our congressional representatives. And that is why I say this is so significant. Paul Manafort is a crook. He worked for the Rothschild New World Order Syndicate, and he did so for years. Nathaniel Rothschild, who is the son of Jacob Rothschild, he's kind of the heir to the Rothschild dynasty. He and George Soros both used Manafort and Manafort's partner, Rick Davis, to carry out geopolitical lobbying operations on their behalf, cozying up to the Rothschilds' Russian and Ukrainian oligarch puppets to work against the interests of the Russian people and Vladimir Putin. So Manafort is connected to Russia, but he's not connected to Putin. He's connected to Russian billionaires who work with the New World Order Mafia. That's where the connection is. So what happened is the deep state took advantage of Jared Kushner's desire to become a more important player in their network. And they used him, and thereby they used his wife Ivanka to convince Donald Trump to bring Manafort on as Trump's campaign chairman, which of course gave the New World Order a foothold in the door of the Trump campaign. Eventually, yes, Donald Trump had the good sense to let Manafort go, but as we've seen, it was too little too late. He's already guilty by association. The Russiagate probe is a political witch hunt, the likes of which America has never seen. I get it. A lot of you hate Donald Trump. So be it. I can see why some people hate him. But if you're going to go after him, you don't undermine the fabric. You don't tear apart the fabric of the system of law to do it. You find the right way to go after him. Okay? We have to be obedient to the law in how we do this. So you guys know that I'm not a big Trump fan, but when it comes to the Russian collusion story, Donald Trump is being unfairly targeted. So if people want to go after Trump, they need to do it the right way. I personally don't believe there needs to be anyone going after Trump. I think that Donald Trump has the potential to do some very good things for America. Now, of course, I can't completely give Trump a pass on this. He's a smart guy. He knew who Manafort was before he got into bed with him. So Trump really doesn't have a whole lot of justification to complain about, having contracted venereal disease, political venereal disease from Manafort. I just can't emphasize enough how dirty Paul Manafort is. While his lobbying firm partner, Rick Davis, now you'll see in the news that along with him, Manafort, an associate of his, kind of his right-hand man, was a guy named Rick Gates. He's been indicted, but I'm talking about a different Rick. This was his lobbying firm partner, Rick Davis. Rick Davis was working one group of oligarchs while Manafort was bilking the other side, working with them. Rick Davis, by the way, was the campaign manager for presidential candidate John McCain. Well, back in March of this year, I published a very damning report on McCain's connections to the Ukrainian and Russian oligarchs, along with McCain's work for George Soros. So if any of you want me to republish that video, let me know in the comments section and I'll put that up. But Paul Manafort is very much an operative in the New World Order. Davis and Manafort played significant roles in helping to pull off the CIA orchestrated and Soros-funded 2014 coup in Ukraine. The coup in Ukraine is 100% the product of a Rothschild syndicate. It's an operation by the New World Order. It's part of a larger globalist plot to choke out the nation of Russia because of Vladimir Putin's efforts to keep Russia strong and sovereign, to stand in opposition of this idea of a global system of government. Can't have a New World Order global system of government if you've got nations like the United States or Russia, strong independent nations, standing in the way of that. So that's why we see these efforts to take down both the United States and Russia. The ironic thing about this Manafort indictment is that Manafort was actually working against the Russian people and their president. But because he was working for Russian oligarchs, it's easy to put out this propaganda story that Manafort was working for Russia. That's why I'm trying to tell you guys about this. I want you to see through the propaganda by having the facts. Now, going forward, if Manafort goes down, we ought to see a whole host of New World Order operatives who work with him go down as well. But I don't think that's going to happen. You know who one of Manafort's close associates is? Roger Stone, that crooked dirtbag who has buddied up to Alex Jones and is now operating as the New World Order's handler for Jones. That's what he is. He's a handler. The fact that Alex Jones is out there defending Paul Manafort when Manafort is so clearly a puppet of Soros, Soros is a puppet of Rothschild, well, that says something about how well Roger Stone has pulled the mask down over Alex Jones' eyes. Jones still produces some excellent content, but in this particular area, he is, at least for the time being, totally compromised. You cannot trust Jones's judgment on this Manafort thing. March 17th, 2018. Let me give you a quick update with what's going on with this Manafort saga. ABC 7 News reports this, quote, Manafort faces very real possibility of spending rest of life in prison, judge says. Doesn't sound good for Paul Manafort. Let me read just a couple paragraphs here from this is from March 13th. Former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort could spend the rest of his life in prison, according to a federal judge in Alexandria, Virginia, assigned to oversee the case. The longtime political lobbyist faces an 18-count indictment in Virginia, which was handed up by a federal grand jury as part of special counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into Russian meddling in the 2016 presidential election. Okay, so just a review, back in early 2016, while working on a report regarding John McCain's connections to Russian and Ukrainian oligarchs, not ones who were allied with Vladimir Putin, but enemies of Putin. In doing that research, some of the information that I was given through my intelligence network led me to Paul Manafort and Rick Davis, his lobbying partner. And because my focus at that time was on John McCain and not on Donald Trump, because this is well before the presidential election, I just kind of set aside some of the stuff about Manafort, but I filed it away in my head thinking, doggone it, this guy's bad news. And then later on, when Donald Trump made the stupid decision to bring in Paul Manafort as his campaign chairman, I thought, oh, well, we see what this is. These are the globalists trying to get their tentacles into Donald Trump to control him. Fortunately, Donald Trump saw that, geez, this is not that great of an idea, at this point, I better get rid of this guy. And he fired Manafort because, we know that Donald Trump can't keep anybody around for very long. But the damage was done. Trump had been linked to Manafort. The whole premise here of this big investigation that Mueller is doing into Trump is that Vladimir Putin, the Russian government, somehow conspired with Trump to throw the election, to interfere with the electoral process here in the United States, and to screw things up and steal the election away from Hillary Clinton, or at least muck it up enough that nobody can have faith in the actual election, the voting process here in America, right? But what Mueller is doing is he's going after somebody who had nothing to do with that. That Paul Manafort is a dirty, rotten scoundrel. He deserves to be in prison for the rest of his life. This is a very bad human being. But it has nothing to do with Russian collusion to throw the election. In fact, if anything can be argued, it's the exact opposite. Because Robert Mueller is failing to point out that this Paul Manafort guy, his clients, his loyalties, politically, financially, were not to the Russians, the Vladimir Putin Russians, but to Vladimir Putin's enemies, the globalists that are trying to undercut and undermine Vladimir Putin. So anyway, for whatever reason, it has become the mission of Robert Mueller to go after Manafort. I think that the idea here is take down Trump by any means necessary. Manafort has been ordered on house arrest. It's a 24-hour day lockdown. He can't leave his apartment, his home rather. It's a condominium. He can't leave it unless he's going to go to the doctor, to see his attorney, or for a court appearance. The judge in the case, whose name is Ellis, Judge Ellis, said that Manafort is, quote, a person of great wealth and has the financial means and international connections to flee and remain at large, as well as every incentive to do so. Okay, that's what the judge said. He continues, specifically, given the nature of the charges against the defendant and the apparent weight of the evidence against him, defendant faces the very real possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison. In this regard, Manafort poses a substantial risk of flight, and the above-mentioned conditions are the least restrictive conditions that will reasonably assume defendant's appearance at trial. And the Manafort was ordered to sign a pledge to pay a $10 million unsecured bond if he misses a court appearance. And of course, Manafort has pled not guilty. But this guy's toast. If Mueller wants this guy to go away, he's going to go away. And Manafort knows that. So, if you are Paul Manafort, what are you going to do? How are you going to get out of this? You've got a couple options. The ultimate option is to turn on Trump, to give Mueller whatever he wants. And that's why Mueller is going after Manafort so hard. He wants Manafort to go against Trump and to, say, give up whatever dirt. I think there probably is some dirt here. Otherwise, Robert Mueller, who's an intelligent guy, he would not be putting so much effort into crushing Manafort, into putting him in a vice grip and squeezing, trying to get him to give something. I think that Mueller knows that Manafort has something on Trump, and he's trying to crank down those screws and get him to talk. But in the meantime, Donald Trump knows this same thing as well. And so the Trump administration has been doing their own stuff to try and, well, make this whole matter go away. You see, in order for this case against Manafort to really stick, you have to have evidence. And the crimes that he committed, the evidence of those crimes, largely, a lot of it comes from sources in Ukraine. And so you have to have cooperation from the Ukrainian government to gather the evidence that you need, that Mueller needs to put Manafort away. So if you're Donald Trump and you know that the Ukrainian government has to cooperate with Mueller, what would you do? would you maybe, and not just Trump, but anybody in Trump's position? I don't want people to get all upset thinking I'm just picking on Trump. If someone were in Trump's position and you're the head of the United States, what would you do? You would probably try and come up with some sweet deal for Ukraine to offer them in whatever publicly acceptable way that you can, to persuade them to maybe not cooperate with Mueller and give him the documents and all of the stuff that he needs, right? Because if Manafort is safe, if Mueller can't get Manafort, then Trump is safe. This really all comes down to Donald Trump. So let me read you here something that came out in the Daily Beast, and this also came out March 13th. Ukraine government has frozen its Manafort investigations. Critics say it is currying favor with Trump. All right, let me read a couple paragraphs. Investigations here into payments allegedly made to Donald Trump's former campaign manager Paul Manafort by deposed Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych have ground to a halt, potentially affecting the U.S. case against Manafort. Information from the Ukraine investigations is a cornerstone of the indictments brought against Manafort by Robert Mueller, who has charged him with money laundering, failure to register as a foreign agent, and other crimes. But it appears that many top officials here, from the current president on down, would like to forget about the Manafort case. Their reason? They don't want to get on the wrong side of the Trump administration. Manafort resigned from the Trump campaign in August 2016 after reports in the American press based on the documents compiled by Ukrainian investigators. And until last year, progress was still being made here, unraveling the complicated scheme, as Mueller calls it, in which the Yanukovych regime, closely allied to Russian President Vladimir Putin, allegedly made secret payments of millions of dollars to Manafort. So I don't know if this is in that any of that older video stuff that I've done in the past, but remember, Manafort and Rick Davis were a lobbying team. They had a multi-million-dollar lobbying company. They had connections to high-level people in the U.S. government, such as John McCain and then others. Now, these guys were working together, but to achieve their goals, they had split up and were working opposite sides. Rick Davis was primarily working the Ukrainian oligarchs, the Russian oligarchs that were anti-Putin, while Manafort was doing the opposite side. He was working the other side. He was working those that were loyal to Vladimir Putin. And that included President Yanukovych, who was a Russian-speaking, ethnically, I think his ethnic background was Russian, but he was the president of Ukraine before George Soros and the CIA came in and overthrew it. So they're working both sides, but they were working both sides for the benefit of the globalists, for the benefit of the Soros faction, the New World Order, working against Vladimir Putin. So, but Robert Mueller ignores all that. The fact is there is a connection between Manafort, Yanukovych, and potentially to Vladimir Putin in that sense. The article goes on, the former Trump campaign chief has insisted on his innocence and has refused to cut a deal with Mueller since his initial indictment in October. So what has happened is the investigation, the person responsible for the investigations there in Kiev, Ukraine, said that that the case has been frozen for 4 months there in Ukraine, that somehow they're just sitting on the case, not producing the evidence necessary for a Mueller to use. And it says here in Kiev, the Manafort scandal that originally exploded in Ukraine's media has dropped out of the headlines, says Serhiy Leshchenko, a member of Ukraine's parliament. President Petro Poroshenko is trying to sell to Trump a deal. We bury the Manafort case and you become our best friend. And Lyshenko published copies of documents from former President Yanukovych's secret ledger showing that Manafort had gotten up to almost $13 million in cash. All right. Many criticized him for these accusations, saying that nobody would ever find enough evidence to prove that Manafort had violated any laws or anything. But this is big money. Big money. They insisted Paul Manafort received huge payments from the pro-Russian Party of Regions, which he did. The point is they have to prove it. They have to get the documentation to prove it. After Manafort quit his job on the Trump campaign in 2016, for about a year, Ukrainian lawmakers and civil groups struggled to find answers to crucial questions. Had Trump's friend Manafort advised Yanukovych to kill dozens of protesters at Maidan Square in early 2014? I hope that some of you guys are following this. I don't know if you are. And I'm not going to go into all the story of the 2014 coup, the CIA-led coup. But the people who are now running Ukraine's government, these are not the normal people that were in there before. Just like in the United States, we've got Democrats, you've got Republicans, you've got people that are West Coasters, you've got East Coasters, you've got people in the South, you've got the Yankees up north. We've got all kinds of different groups. And together we have the U.S. Congress, the House, the Senate, everybody's mixed in. Well, over in Ukraine, you also had different demographics there as well. You had primarily a split between the pro-Russian people that were largely in the east of Ukraine, and then in West Ukraine, closer to Europe, deeper into Europe, you've got the pro-Western, the pro-NATO, the pro-globalist guys over there, and these are the two groups. Well, the government in 2014, at that time, the leader of the government was from the pro-Russian side. There's no surprise that they would be pro-Russian. I mean, a lot of these people are Russians. They're on the border of Russia. They were part of the Soviet Union for years. So this is not some crazy thing. But once they overthrew the government and ran Yanukovych out of the country, president of Ukraine had to flee for his life, they didn't turn around and make a balanced government again. They just stacked it full of these Western Ukrainian politicians and put Poroshenko in charge, and he's the puppet they stuck in there. And so at this point, Ukraine is largely under the control of the globalists. They're under control of the kind of oligarchs that were being backed by Manafort's partner, Rick Davis, and who was working with them. So anyway, this is ongoing. There is definitely work being done, influence there. Trump has to be very careful. If I was advising Donald Trump, I would say, do everything you can to get away from Ukraine. If it just, don't touch it. Don't touch Ukraine. Don't give them any benefits. Don't give them any perks. In fact, just keep them at arm's length, because anything that you do to support the current Ukrainian regime, the anti-Putin regime that's in Ukraine, anything that you do there is going to look like you are trying to manipulate Ukraine. So leave it alone, because it's only going to look bad for you. That would be my advice to Trump. Stay out of it. Take your chances, because if you get caught screwing around, for example, this $47 million deal that is getting ready to go through, you've got American Javelin anti-tank missiles, dozens of related command launch units from the Trump administration. This big $47 million deal, it was just approved a couple of weeks ago. So Trump's administration, whether you want to blame it on Trump or not, whatever, it's in the eye of the beholder, but the administration is wheeling and dealing with the Ukrainian government, and whether you want to say it's connected or not, the Ukrainian government is not helping out in providing the documentation that Mueller could use to go after Manafort with. So is this quid pro quo? It sure seems like it to me. But, I know everyone's got a different opinion and whatever, but this is ugly. This is ugly. Trump's in the hot seat. I don't think that folks out there really realize what an effective job that Robert Mueller is doing. And I've said before, I believe this is a political witch hunt. I think that Mueller should be removed. I wish that, I don't know if the U.S. Congress has the power to be the ones to remove him, but what they do have the power to do is impeach an elected official, or in this case, probably they have the power to impeach an appointed official. Impeachment is not just for a president. You can impeach a judge, you can impeach anybody who is derelict, excuse me, in their duties. And Robert Mueller is definitely stepping well beyond the bounds of what he's supposed to have the authority to do, in my opinion. But Trump's in a bad spot. He can't go after Mueller himself. If he does, I'm sure Trump's attorneys have told him, this is a red line. This is what Richard Nixon did. If you cross this line, guaranteed you're going to get impeached. There's no question. You fired Mueller, and that's the end of your presidency. So Trump can't do it. And we all know that Donald Trump loves to fire people. But he hasn't fired Mueller. That's because Mueller has so much power and influence here. It would be quite an outcry, a true constitutional crisis. So that's why I would like to see the U.S. Congress step up and do what it can to try and take control of this situation. Of course, the Democrats aren't going to do anything. Now, I'll end with this. You all know that I hate Donald Trump as a president. I cannot stand his character. I think that he is not a good person. I think he's a con man. I think that people are fooled by him. But he's the president of the United States. And I support the presidency. I support the office of the president. And what you do to one guy, it doesn't matter that I don't like Donald Trump. If you attack him in an unjust way, that sets a very bad precedent. Because what you can do to him, you can do to somebody else. And once you cross that line and you start doing this kind of thing, it devolves into a cage fight from one party to the other, and we don't want to see this. So if you want to get rid of Donald Trump, find the right way to do it. Democrats, if you want to get rid of Trump on terms that are constitutional. If you can find evidence sufficient to impeach, find it, submit it, give it a shot. But do it the right way. This Mueller bull crap is not right. It is unethical, it's immoral, and that is why in this instance, for this purpose, I don't care that I don't agree with Trump's politics. I stand by Trump for this, because what's being done to him is not right. That's not how you get rid of a president. If you don't like him, vote him out, impeach and remove, use 25th Amendment, whatever you need to do, but you don't do it this way. Well, that's it. I hope that this information hasn't been too disjointed. Oh, I know it's not a topic that a lot of people love, but if you really want to get into the nuts and bolts of what's going on and truly understand this, this whole Robert Mueller investigation and what's going on, this is the kind of stuff you have to get into to understand. And I hope that you can appreciate that having an understanding of these things elevates your ability to have a logical, fact-based discussion with your friends, with your neighbors, with associates at work or social media, to where it's not just name-calling and backbiting and stabbing and just... I really love political debate. I always have. I've always loved political debate. But it has become very hard over the years to find people that are willing to disagree with me in a rational way. And maybe you guys experience that as well, depending on the topic that you may be debating with somebody, that they're just irrational. And when someone is not gonna rely on facts when everything is emotion based or insult based. There's no fun in it. What's fun is to have a healthy exchange of ideas between people who may disagree on an issue. And if you engage in debate with an open mind, maybe you'll even learn something from your opponent. I know I do. I learn things from people all the time who I disagree with. I think that's a sign of maturity, but today's social media trolls and social justice warriors, to them it's all about feelings, and you said something about my candidate, and so I'm triggered. I need a safe space, but first I'm going to unsubscribe from your channel and insult you and tell you horrible things. Someone even said something really nasty about my grandmother a couple days ago because I had spoken out against Trump. And I mean, who does that? I mean, who insults somebody's dead grandmother in a sexual way? It was a sexually charged comment about my dead grandmother from a Trump supporter. You Trump cultists out there. Just, there's no low that these people won't stoop to. But, I dare you to have a real adult conversation with me on the facts. I will run circles around you and bury you with facts. Bury you deep in the ground. But, I guess somebody who would insult your dead grandmother is not the kind of person who much cares about facts or truth or that kind of thing. Keep drinking that Kool-Aid. Folks, that's it for this video. For Blackstone Intelligence, I'm Jake Morphonios.